So thank you everybody for being here tonight for perceived pests in the landscape. We're happy to have Brad back here with us again. He was last with us over the winter to talk about bats, and which was a fabulous presentation, and we're thankful to have another one tonight. Brad has been the mammologist for the Indiana DNR since 2018. He has a diverse work history as an ecologist working with animals ranging from fish in Utah and New Mexico, birds in Central America and Florida, and mammals across the southwestern US. He obtained his Bachelor's of Science in Conservation Ecology from New Mexico State University, and later his Master's of Science in Biology with a focus on disease ecology from Texas State University. Currently, Brad can be found working with bats, rodents, bears, and rabbits across Indiana. What a fabulous way to spend the workday. Thanks so much for being here, Brad. Real quick, I should introduce myself, I suppose. I'm Brooke Alford. I am the current chair of the Central Chapter of Indiana Native Plant Society. Alan Shakart is the president of the state organization, and Purdue Extension is a partner in hosting this Zoom presentation tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. It was certainly a blast talking to this group about bats earlier this year. It seems like so long ago, but this was such a fun group to present bats to, and you guys have spread the word of bats everywhere, far and wide. And I've had people reaching out not only for presentations this October about bats, but next October also. So, and they're all saying that, they heard about this through Indiana Native Plant Society. So I really appreciate that. I feel like you're helping to turn the tide on how some animals are perceived. So thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. All right, so the talk today is perceived pests. And I almost wanted to change this topic to something else, at least the title of it, because I don't want you to think of all these animals as pests. I'm trying to get at here, and if you watch the bat talk, I'm trying to get at how we can perceive these animals differently by seeing ourselves as part of nature, and that changing our behaviors or things that we do can actually make coexistence with these animals a lot easier and a lot less stressful for ourselves. So let's get into this. Uh-oh, if my buttons work. Here we go. All right, so you guys are doing a fantastic job of contributing to biodiversity. In your journey with Indiana Native Plant Society, or even before that, you may have achieved your vision for reestablishing native plants on your property. And you could see something like this, and maybe wildlife are moving back into this area now. And it's fantastic. And I'm very glad for you. This is awesome. Or maybe, with the area that you have, the time available, your life circumstances, things like that, maybe this is all you can accomplish currently, creating native planters that are beneficial for wildlife in planters, or in, planting boxes, or just on your balcony, if that's all you can do. But that's still fantastic. You're introducing some fantastic colors, textures, and shapes into the landscape, and you're breaking up, the norm of there only needs to be a lawnscape in America. And I think that what you guys are doing is truly amazing. You're actively improving biodiversity at your scale, at whatever you can do. And these actions are collective. Not only are you doing this at the chapter level, but at the state level, and then across states, other native plant societies are doing this as well. So collectively, this entire organization is doing some amazing work, and you're doing it on private land, which can be some of the toughest land to do some work on, and it all adds up. So you've acted as a steward of this landscape, and you've not only helped improve air and water quality, but you're preventing soil erosion, you're increasing biodiversity at the microscopic level, from soil microbes to the plant microbes. You're increasing biodiversity all the way up to the landscape level, in fact. And you've not just planted native plants, but you're a part of planting habitats and restoring native habitats to the landscape. You're integral in providing, water in terms of water retention, shelter for tons of wildlife, invertebrates and vertebrates alike, for increasing space for native species that I work with that are maybe imperiled, that need that extra space. And you're likely contributing to food, whether or not you intended to when you set out on this journey, but you're probably contributing to the food of some of these animals, invertebrates or vertebrates, anytime, any season of the year, and they appreciate it. And maybe your participation in this group, doesn't have you planting native plants in your area where you can. Maybe your big contribution is really removing invasive plants, and that's even better. That's fantastic. You are possibly removing locally or eradicating invasive vegetation that chokes out native life. And in doing so, you're raising awareness of this problem. You're bringing this into your network. Your friends and your family are seeing you do this, and they're seeing that it's an issue and that it needs to be addressed. And you're probably having a huge impact on that. And this is having a huge impact on improving habitats and giving space back to native flora and fauna so that they can have an opportunity to take back areas of Indiana that have been lost to invasive vegetation. So for all your guys' work, thank you. That was just a big way to say thanks. And now I can get into my talk. So as I was preparing for this, I was checking out Indiana Native Plant Society's website, and I really liked your vision, your mission, the goals you have. And then there's one line in this vision statement that I really like. We all envision an Indiana whose citizens treasure and protect their native plants and the web of life that relies on them. And that "and" can be very difficult to achieve. From where I sit in terms of monitoring and managing wildlife, that "and" is very difficult. I receive a lot of customer calls every day, any time of the year, saying, I have this problem with a mammal that's on my porch, or I have a bat infestation, or I have a mouse infestation. And I find that's always the hardest part of my job, is changing perceptions of these animals, turning it away from, you don't have a pest problem, you have like a food storage issue that's caused by you, and it's attracting these animals. You don't have an animal problem, you have a storage problem. And so that's always the most difficult part for me. And I really like this portion of your vision, because it really gets at, what this society is about, but also turning that perception of the general public, people who aren't even a member of the society. And so I find that a lot of our existence in suburbia, in apartments, whatever, is coexisting with people. We set up dividers, we put up fences, we try to sort of set our own domains that we don't want anyone or anything to really cross into unless it's invited. So there's fences up to keep ideally people and maybe wildlife out. And then when things cross over that, you have an invader coming into your property, and we have this perception of seeing things as ours and property, when really we're all just part of a larger nature. And even this lawnscape you see here is part of nature. And the house behind it, which you can't see in this picture, is also part of nature, and animals will use it as shelter if they need to and if they're comfortable doing that. And so, what I would like to see is this change of perceptions of us living in our own domains where, we don't let anything in there, to something more like what prairie dogs do. Prairie dogs are a keystone species in the prairies that they occur in. And a keystone species is something that, has a larger impact on the landscape, and multiple species, many species, if not the entire ecosystem where they're in, relies upon this one species to do what it does in order for everything to survive. And I find this example of prairie dogs to just be fantastic, because they're creating these intensive networks of burrows. They're eating vegetation out there, so they're controlling grass height. Many other species are using the burrows that they're in. So you have invertebrates using it. You have predators using the same burrow systems that they do, whether it's a snake or a ferret. You have bison on the plains that rely on these guys, and they rely on them just as much. So it'd be really nice to get to this coexistence of, maybe you don't have to have wildlife living in your house or in your attic, but if you could be comfortable with wildlife passing through and you are comfortable with understanding that wildlife's behavior and what it's doing at that time of year so that you know how to, alter your behaviors around it. Maybe at that time of year, you need to put your garbage can in your garage or wait until trash day to take that really smelly bag of trash out of the freezer and put it in that garbage, so that you're not influencing those wildlife as they move through our backyards or our spaces that we begin to share with them. So that's what I would like to see. And oftentimes, nature is seen by different people at a different scale. Some people will travel across the country that they're in to get to a national park or a national forest, because in their minds, that's where nature is most pristine. They don't see nature as being the coyote that's passing through, downtown Indianapolis as being part of nature. They maybe see that as a pest or a nuisance animal moving through there. And it's moving through a city, not necessarily through a habitat, even though the animal is using it as a habitat. And maybe other people are using their scale at different levels, at the state level, or maybe the larger city level, or even in their neighborhoods, where they go to parks to get into nature, to experience that fresh air. And it really depends on people's circumstances, how they were brought up, their cultures, and it would take a lot to change a lot of people's perceptions. But I feel like people learn by watching leaders and watching other people set examples. I feel like this group is a good group to set examples. So I wanted to show this again. We build fences to keep animals out, but that doesn't necessarily mean that animals are going to stay out. So this was a picture of my backyard a few months ago, and I had bats flying through the backyard, and it was fantastic. And there's deer moving through that area further beyond the fence, coyotes also. And I really enjoy this space that I have where I can see a lot of nature just moving through. And that's my way to enjoy it, just in my own backyard, and appreciate it. And other people may have other ways of enjoying nature in their close spaces. So whether you're comfortable with, creating small planters of native vegetation, and you have invertebrate communities that you are supporting, you have monarch butterflies coming in and living a life cycle right there, that is fantastic. Other people are into bird feeding. And, if you do it responsibly and wash your bird feeders so that birds can't spread diseases around, this can be a fantastic way to be incorporated in nature and to learn about it and appreciate it. But what happens, unfortunately, is that a lot of people have different perceptions of wildlife, and they have different comfort levels with wildlife. So how much distance is needed for some people really varies for them to appreciate nature. Maybe seeing this coyote from across an open field is uncomfortable for some people, and others will enjoy it. But say, what happens if you have a red fox, moving in and inspecting the area underneath your shed? Maybe it's going to start to dig a burrow there. In this picture, this is a female fox, and she has a den underneath the foundation of that shed. In this case, the person who took the picture was comfortable with this. They knew what was going on with the fox. They had their livestock protected in terms of ducks and chickens, and they were comfortable with sharing their space with that animal. But other people might not be comfortable with that, and that's okay. But what if nature gets really close? Like, what if it's in your living spaces, or in your spaces very close to your living spaces? So like bats in your attic, or bats underneath these shingles, or a raccoon, climbing up on your house. Maybe it gets up on your gutters and shimmies on up to your roof and attempts to get into your chimney or your attic or something like that. Some of you may be able to handle a situation like this. Maybe you've had something similar happen before. Maybe you are just more open to having nature around you, and you understand these animals are just looking for shelter so that they can survive. And as long as they're not getting into living spaces, you're comfortable with that. And other times this can lead to wildlife conflict. If people have never been in this situation before, they don't know that they need to perhaps secure their trash a little bit better so that wildlife can't get into these free attractants, these very alluring foods that are loaded in sugars and fats that these guys know would help them survive. They would help them pack on fat, or at least provide that much more milk for their young. Someone who gets in a situation like this might not know how to handle it. They might approach it the wrong way. This animal is obviously head deep in trash. And if you approach it the wrong way, it may try to attack you because it's defending this trash. Whereas humans are seeing it as, hey, you're on my property and I'm going to shoo you out of here. So there's a lot of maybe self-awareness and education that needs to happen. And a lot of this can happen between neighbors. If you see something like this happen to a neighbor, you can say, hey, I noticed you had raccoons get into your trash. I do this with my trash cans over here because they've tried to do it in the past, and this actually keeps them out pretty effectively. Or if you start to see an animal hanging out a little closer to homes, maybe their kids are outside and the kids aren't paying attention to the wildlife. These are good things to bring to people's attention so that behaviors can be changed so that there's fewer negative human wildlife interactions. And a lot of these negative human wildlife interactions happen because of food source attractants. This was a fantastic graphic I found on the National Park Service's website, and they had a good quote that went with it. It's part of a larger article. The link is down there in the corner. Part of their quote was, feeding wildlife is actually a form of animal cruelty. And they mean, directly feeding wildlife because it's luring, in this circumstance, wildlife closer to roads so that they could potentially get hit by cars. It's actually lessening that natural fear of humans that many wildlife have. And that's something that wildlife needs in order to survive, especially in our ever increasingly more human-dominated landscape. Now, wildlife conflicts are nothing new. We have created plenty of outreach material, whether it's Bearwise in the Southeast, creating information in multiple languages, telling people how they can safely coexist with bears in a very simple number of steps, about 6 steps there, in terms of what they need to do to minimize having a negative interaction with bears. So removing attractants from outside, not feeding wildlife, cleaning your grill, maintaining a tight leash on your pets, or at least monitoring them while they're out in the yard, things like that. And in Florida, they're getting out messaging about coyotes live in all sorts of environments, all sorts of habitats to a coyote. And if you follow a certain number of tips, not feeding them, cleaning up garbage, securing livestock, and monitoring your pets, you can minimize negative human interactions and actually coexist with these guys. And there's populations of coyotes that live in very dense human centers. Chicago's a fantastic and a pretty famous example of this, with coyotes living pretty much in downtown Chicago. They stay hidden during the day in areas where humans don't come and bother them, and they don't bother humans. And then at night, they'll actually, cruise around down some pretty major streets in Chicago. And people have taken pictures of them. They've even gone into convenience stores, exploring smells and things like that. So they do live in areas of very dense human populations, and it's possible to coexist. So this map I have here on the left, the very colorful one, this is a map of land use in Indiana. It's a very simplified map of land use in Indiana, with red being cities, blue being water, green forests, and orange agriculture. Now, in areas close to humans, you're going to have more opportunities for human wildlife interactions. And then when you increase the density of humans, which you're seeing on that census map on the right, those darker shaded counties have a greater number of humans per square mile compared to the lighter colored counties. And so when you get into these counties that have darker colors, it's typically going to be around city centers. That makes sense. But there's a lot of sprawl that goes on. And a lot of that sprawl also happens to overlap with forests, as you can see in this overlay I did here. It also overlaps with rivers and riparian areas where wildlife are going to be moving from one habitat to the next if they're not just using backyards. And so there's plenty of opportunities for coexistence, and there's unfortunately lots of opportunities for negative human wildlife interactions to occur, especially in those areas of dense human populations. And so one thing I wanted to point out was I added this in the chat. was that we have this Living with Wildlife webpage on Indiana DNR's website. And it has 3 sections to it. There's an introduction to species, which has, a list of species. If you're ever having a problem with one of these animals and you're maybe not sure how to proceed with that, you notice it's getting into your trash or it's getting on your roof all the time and you think it might be getting in your attic, what do? You can come to this webpage, look up the species in question and see what it recommends. Because some species you actually need a permit and you need to handle the situation during certain seasons. Other species, maybe you don't want to mess with at all. And there's links on here for nuisance wildlife control operators. There's also links for plenty of other mammals that you may encounter to give you a more basic idea of their biology. And then some extra links at the bottom. The second page here is going to show you interacting with wildlife. It's going to go over harassing wildlife and how this can be an effective tool for changing behavior of wildlife. Now, keep in mind, this only works if you remove attractants and other things that might be luring the wildlife to your house. It gives you tips for positive interactions with wildlife. You'll see that number 1 on there was don't feed wildlife. And then it gets, there's plenty of bullets on here. So there's lots of really good tips for having positive wildlife interactions. There's a little section for reporting a conflict and then more helpful links at the bottom. And this final one is some common questions that we get. And we try to update these as scenarios change, as we receive different feedback from the public. Maybe one of these questions is no longer as relevant because people just know what to do and we're not getting that question anymore. We'll update it with things that are most relevant to you guys, our customers who are contacting us with wildlife problems. So you can go through here. They're all listed in accordions. You click on that plus sign or on the question itself, and it'll create this drop-down menu with an answer. But the big takeaways are, if you want to peacefully coexist with wildlife, never feed wildlife, essentially. Now, this isn't referring to, planting native plants that are going to produce berries or seed pods. It's not referring to bird feeders exclusively. If you responsibly do bird feeders, then this isn't referring to that. It's referring to, leaving out scraps for animals on purpose. It's referring to throwing out food to an animal or even feeding it out of your hand so that it's losing that fear of humans. These are things you never want to do. Another big takeaway is securing garbage, because wildlife can smell those fats, those oils, and those sugars. It's very alluring. It's super unique to them. They're out there eating, what might not be very appealing to us, but it has a unique smell to them. They know their native foods. And then you put in this aroma of something, extra sweet or extra fatty, and it's just too tantalizing for them because they're in survival mode day to day. And if they can eat that super oily trash, even if it's ingesting a lot of plastic, they'll still do it so that they can try to pack on fat. They don't know better. Some other good tips are, clean and secure your grills after use. Or, you don't have to do it after every use, maybe after every week you use it. Empty the fat trap, clean the grill, cover it back up, or, put it in your garage if you can, so that those smells are removed from the environment. That way you don't have predators coming closer to your porch or to your deck or wherever it is you grill. So you're not luring them closer to you and your family. You can remove bird feeders if it becomes a problem with, squirrels and raccoons knocking them over, or if you're in certain portions of Indiana at the right time of year. We have been getting more bears in the state since about 2015. And if you have bears in the area, taking down bird feeders is one of the best pieces of advice you can do, because the bears find that as a very easy, highly nutritious and high calorie meal that they can just easily get to. You want to protect your pets, obviously. If you have small pets, you don't want to just let them outside and not pay attention to them, because nature's all around. You could have a coyote easily jump a fence or dig under a fence. You could have a hawk or an eagle fly over and do something to a small animal. So protect your pets, keep them inside, keep your indoor cats indoors, keep your dogs in a yard, monitor them, or keep them on leash. This also helps prevent any transmission of diseases from wildlife to pets or vice versa. And then, if you see a problem, like I mentioned before, inform your neighbors. So if you see maybe a coyote lurking around, and you notice that your neighbor's trash is always open, and maybe that coyote's attracted to that, you can go tell your neighbor, hey, I got this really good resource on living with wildlife from the DNR, and you can pass this on. That might be easier to palate than going over there and telling them, hey, you need to stop doing this because coyotes and other things are being attracted to it. Then your neighbor might become a little too defensive and not open or receptive to this idea of living with wildlife. So I always find it hard in a challenging way. I enjoy doing it to bridge this gap of getting from thinking of a lot of these animals as pests to thinking of them as wildlife living in habitats, just trying to survive, and us having to change our behaviors so that these wildlife have fewer negative interactions with us, or at least from our perspective, we have fewer negative interactions with them. The goal is to not habituate these animals to humans. They need that fear of humans to survive. And so when I think about issues, when people call me up and say, hey, I have this going on with rabbits, what do I do? I like to think about, the flow of energy and what's going on in their backyard or in the habitat around them. And so you can either think about a food pyramid, or you could think about a food web. And you have on the bottom of these things, your decomposers and your producers, your plants, your invertebrates, your fungi. They're being ingested by primary consumers. So things that are either eating plants or eating those insects and fungi. They're typically not eating other meats. There's exceptions to a bunch of rules. And then you have your secondary consumers, which are going to be animals that will eat your primary consumers for the most part. And then tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers and primary consumers, and sometimes producers too. So you have this pyramid. And in Indiana, we have about 61 species of mammals. We have all these ones that I have listed here, and they're clumped into groups, so I didn't have to take up too much space. Now, looking at this on a food pyramid, most of the calls I get when I'm thinking about how to help these people with thinking about their perceived pest problem, I deduce that a lot of their issues are coming because of, these are primary consumers, and that helps me think about this animal's behavior and what it's going for. But not all the animals we have here in Indiana are primary consumers. You're going to see there's some overlap between opossums and carnivores. I had those both pointing to primary consumers because they do eat plants and some decomposers, but they're also secondary consumers. And carnivores, a lot of them that we have here in the state, are also tertiary consumers. Well, they'll eat most of those things that are beneath them on this pyramid. And so for me, it's critical to understand the conflict and which portion I need to address. Do I need to address an issue where there's lots of vegetation in an area, and if the landowner were to clear out some of that vegetation, it would reduce that small mammal population enough for them to feel comfortable? Maybe they have lots of mice getting into their house every year and they can't figure out why. That could be a solution to that, is just clearing out some of that understory so that there are fewer voles out there, or so that other predators can navigate underneath that vegetation a little bit easier. Or the opposite of this could be true. Maybe they're okay with having all the plants around them. They're okay with having small mammals and other primary consumers around them. But what their issue is with a comfort level around having predators near them. And so I can sort of work the situation backwards. And so I sort of think of these things as like a top down or a bottom up when I'm helping people work through their situations. And so for top down, I'm focusing on what can I advise this person to do, and what information can I give them that will empower them so that they can focus on doing something that will help encourage that predator to move on, and that'll be a positive experience for them. They'll know how to handle the situation in the future. They'll know how to handle it should a neighbor have something similar go on. And so I'll start off with some of these top-down ones. So one of the first things I do is I ask, why is that predator there? And a lot of times people don't have the answer to this, but I try to present this to them as okay, what's the predator? Because some of them are more adaptable to humans than others. Some of them are more adaptable to human habitats than others. So coyotes, for example, are pretty flexible in the habitats they can live in. They still require, some places to be super secretive, but they can go foraging through suburbia essentially and find the food they need in terms of voles and gophers and things like that, and never really have a negative interaction with humans. But bobcats, on the other hand, they're a little bit more secretive. They're more elusive. They prefer more space from people, and especially from dense populations of people where habitat's been altered a lot. So understanding the adaptability of these animals to humans can help me answer these questions for people. Understanding the time of year that the conflict is happening definitely helps. So is it the breeding season and more males are out roaming looking for females? Typically, when it's the breeding season in January, February through about March, because you're starting to see a lot more animals, or you're starting to see a lot more sign of animals. Maybe that's roadkill on the roads, or just sign of animals passing through your yard. A lot of these males are running around looking for mates. In a lot of mammal societies, they have multiple mates. The males do, trying to spread their genes around. The females are also trying to spread their genes, raise successful young with the strongest male. And that's a huge time of year to see animals and to have interactions, or at least to have, in some cases, perceived interactions, because people don't know why they're seeing a lot more coyotes at this time of year. And it's like, well, it's because it's the breeding season and they're out just looking for mates. And then the other two main ones that really come up are, is that predator there because of food or because of shelter? And it could be food or shelter for that predator, or food or shelter that's available for prey that predator is seeking. So, is it natural food that's around? Is that what the issue is when there are carnivores present? And could altering that food that's present and luring the prey in, could altering those things reduce that prey population and therefore reduce the presence of predators? They're not going to see that backyard in particular as a pretty attractive hunting ground anymore. It's going to be sparse of food, so why bother? Or is it something more like this, where food is present all the time in terms of a dumpster, and all an animal has to do is get in there and pull that food out? It can drag a bag of trash into the woods and eat on it for a couple of days, or in the case of smaller animals, maybe they'll just dumpster dive and eat food in there for a while and teach their young to do this. And this is a continuous problem because it's fixable. It's entirely fixable. Or is there other shelter available for either of these large predators? So like a coyote could potentially dig a den underneath a shed, or a badger, as you can see in this case. This was a badger that had dug under a small shed. Maybe you have, crawl spaces that animals can get into. And in this case, you have a gray fox utilizing a crawl space of a trailer. It's actually using this area as a den to raise its young. So what are the next steps if you have a carnivore and you don't know what to do, and you're having this negative issue, or your neighbor is, and you don't want it to escalate to fear mongering, and the people are too afraid to go outside to use their backyard space, but you want them to be able to coexist with this animal at the same time? Well, one thing you can do is you get on that Living with Wildlife webpage and see what the next step is for that animal in particular. For some species, it could be reporting it to DNR. So badgers, sandhill cranes, river otters, these are all reportable species. There's a link at the bottom of the Living with Wildlife page where you can report such a thing, so that we can keep track of these and see how much of an issue it is in what regions of the state. And then if you decide to move forward with this, depending on the animal, you might need to obtain a nuisance wild animal permit in order to actually capture this animal. And in a lot of cases, it's a lot easier to just contact a wildlife control operator, because they can get the permit that is needed to safely capture and document the capture of this species. This badger is a fantastic example of that, because it is state protected. And then they can actually live trap and relocate if possible. And if not possible, they will humanely euthanize that animal, which might be the better option in some circumstances, depending on what wildlife diseases are going on in the area, the body condition of this animal, or unfortunately, in a lot of cases, how human habituated it is. So whether or not it knows that humans or human habitats could mean food sources. And so it might just, go back to a human habitat in the future. Ooh, I see a question about how to control groundhogs, chipmunks, and voles, and I'll get to that one. So in order to avoid a lot of these negative conflicts, there's some good methods that are very easy to employ that we can do to avoid negative human wildlife interactions with carnivores and omnivores. So in this picture, I'm thinking about everything from bears down to raccoons. If you have a dumpster that a bear is getting into, you can potentially get a stronger lid to cover that top. A lid that locks even, that a bear can't open, would be even better. Something that you can unlock, throw your trash in as needed, but it doesn't have to be unlocked all the time, and it's sturdy enough so that a bear can't break through it if it's standing on top of it. They make similar dumpsters for raccoons that are raccoon proof. And you can even, in a pinch, just get some very thick plywood, throw it over the top, or even build a frame that you can put over the top just to help keep wildlife out of these things. Electric fences are fantastic. You can get portable, small electric fences that you can put around beehives, around compost piles. If you start to have some of these carnivores or omnivores moving in and eating some of these things, in the case of beehives and livestock, I mean, you can have a significant monetary investment in those. And if you have a bear or anything else get in there and damage your livestock or damage those beehives, it could be a significant cost to you. And then other things work too, like motion sensor lights or understanding the behaviors and life cycle of your own animals. So if you have livestock, you can actually keep your pregnant cows, for example, closer to your barn, release them into a smaller paddock if you have to for when they're about to give birth. Release them into that smaller one instead of releasing them into the 100-acre field that you have. That way you can keep a closer eye on them when they're most vulnerable and when they're getting a lot of those smells that might attract predators out there, a lot of those blood smells, and putting out stress pheromones, making stressful calls, things that might attract some predators. There are some other things you can do. Consider what attractants are around you and if they're supplemental or natural. So if there's bird feeders around, are they well maintained? Do they spill often? Is there tons of seed underneath them? I would say that's supplemented food that could be attracting a lot of these, raccoons and things in here that then could be attracting bobcats and coyotes that could potentially, break that comfort level for you or your neighbors. So think about these things. Natural supplementation of wildlife. So these native plantings here, they're not going to cause a rodent population to become overabundant and have that lure in coyotes or anything. You may get some more rodents in there, some more voles enjoying the understory, eating the vegetation, but you're not going to have a huge population of rodents all of a sudden that's luring in lots of large predators. And if bird feeders are an issue, you can take them down periodically so that wildlife, especially these large mammals, stop being accustomed to them. They don't know when they're going to be out there. You can put baffles on them. You can buy spill-proof or species-specific ones to help minimize those attractants. And now, I want to sort of get into the bottom-up portion of the food web. So looking from the bottom up, it's very similar from the top-down approach. Top-down, I'm trying to limit the prey items. Bottom up, you have to think more about the space that these animals are getting into, because they're typically getting into smaller spaces, maybe spaces that are harder to observe, and spaces that might go unnoticed for quite a while until suddenly you realize, oh, I have a family of squirrels in my attic, or oh, I have an armadillo living underneath my shed. So there are some lethal control measures that can be taken in some situations, but I'm going to really try to press on the methods you can use to really coexist with these guys. So a lot of rodents and small mammals are going to seek shelter under porches, in crawl spaces, under foundations, whether it's a concrete slab foundation or if it's say like a gravel foundation that 4x6s are set on top of. They may get into attics, they may get into soffits or garages or sheds or even wood piles. They're really just out there surviving. They see this convenient habitat and they say, hey, why not? I'm gonna try to live here because oddly enough, there are no predators around and I feel safe. And that could be the case for a while until bobcats and coyotes figure out, hey, all those little rodents are over here. So say you find the groundhog underneath your foundation, or an armadillo digging underneath your foundation, or maybe even a skunk getting underneath your porch. What do? Well, first you want to evict the animals because you don't want to trap them in there. You can do that yourself, or you can contact a wildlife control operator. And so that eviction could mean, live trapping them. It could mean hazing them out of there, ushering them out. And then once you know they're gone, you can move on to preventing. And so you can prevent access in many ways using metal flashing, hardware cloth, rebar in some cases, backer rod, steel wool, or even copper mesh can be good in some smaller spaces. Same with that backer rod. And it really depends on the space we're talking about. So the illustration in the top middle, this is, say, like the edge of a porch. And if you had raccoons, opossums, skunks, or even small rodents getting underneath your porch, and you wanted to stop that, you could potentially secure and bury some hardware cloth or even metal flashing to your porch, and then bury it in the ground, do it all the way around your porch. And that's one method to keep wildlife out. If they start to dig under to another portion, you might have to improve upon your security there. Or maybe you have a groundhog digging underneath the foundation to your house or your shed or something, and you want to stop that. You can live trap that animal out there. Or maybe you see the digging start and they don't have a burrow yet. So then you can do this to sort of head it off before it becomes an issue. You can actually get rebar about 1.5 feet length to 2 feet, and you can pound it into the ground where the digging is occurring or where the digging has occurred. Space out the bars maybe an inch or two apart and pound in the next one, and just do that for maybe a foot on either side of where the digging's happening. It's tough work, but doing this will actually definitely keep that wildlife out. It'll prevent them from digging there in the future. And, it might keep other wildlife from digging there in the future too. Some smaller mammals will tend to use pipes to climb up to the roof of your house. So raccoons could use gutters. They could use smaller pipes as well, like electrical conduit pipes, water pipes, gas pipes, things like that. And if you just install a piece of flashing over that pipe, something that's maybe 8 to 10 inches wide, and make it long too, like 1 foot to 1.5 feet long, make it fit snug around that pipe or that gutter. And make sure there's just no purchase for an animal to grab on top of or around. And should they try to climb that thing again, they'll reach that metal flashing. They won't be able to climb up anymore. So that's one way to keep smaller animals off of, getting into your soffits or your gables or where these pipes enter your house. And make sure to seal where pipes do enter houses too, because that's where a lot of mice will get in. Mice and insects utilize those things a lot. Now, there are some underground mammals that you might want to think about too. And there are ways to help avoid negative human wildlife interactions with these guys. So I'm talking about the voles, the moles, the pocket gopher, and the eastern cottontail rabbit. And so here are some images of some pretty common mole sign on the left and vole sign on the right. Voles sometimes live underground, but most of the time they just create these runways right at ground level, right underneath vegetation. But they're very notorious for causing damage to plants in the wintertime because they'll create these tunnels underneath the snow, so you can't really monitor their behavior. So any prevention you want to, any damage prevention you want to do in terms of voles, you need to think about before winter comes, before they're actually moving around under the snow, and then essentially ringing your trees because they're chewing on the bark of the trees underneath the snow line. And then for gophers and things, you have to start thinking subterranean in terms of what I can do to prevent this animal from digging under, this new native tree that I planted that I'm trying to nurse back to health, that I'm trying to get to survive so it could become a mature tree like a shagbark hickory for a bat or something. And there are ways to protect, your plants from these subterranean animals. It could be if you have a planter box, and this is where your native plantings are, and you want to keep moles and other things out of there, you could attach hardware cloth to the bottom of this before you plant anything. Or if you have a new tree or a new shrub and you're trying to protect it from moles or gophers, or even voles, you can bury some hardware cloth or even flashing into the ground and then have it kick out towards the direction that an animal might be coming from. And this is a fantastic way to help keep those animals out. It still allows them to live in your backyard or in your space, but it prevents them from hurting that thing you care about, that tree you just planted, or your planter that you care so much about and put so much time into. It prevents that negative interaction from them, hurting something that you put so much time into, that then might give you a negative perception of this animal. Similar thing with rabbits. With existing fences, you could just get some chicken wire or some hardware cloth, fold it into an L shape with a 90-degree bend in it, and attach it to the bottom of the fencing on the side that the rabbits currently are, so the side you want to keep them on. Stake it into the ground, attach it to your fence, and that's a very effective way to keep them out. You can also use electric fences. You could use permanent ones, you could use temporary ones, but they're very effective for keeping rabbits out. And then the next thing you want to start thinking about is, food attractants for small mammals. A lot of times they'll be attracted to vegetation, fruits, and seeds. There's a huge variety of small mammals. There's like 22 rodents and small mammals that I'm talking about here. So among those 22 mammals, some of them eat vegetation, others will opportunistically eat fruits, and a lot of them will eat seeds in the winter or fall months. So understanding what that mammal is going for is very important. Now, your native plantings are likely not going to, like I said, create this massive population of rodents. If there is a boom year and there's lots of rodents, then there's going to be a bust year, and they're not going to have the food available in the future, and that population is going to crash. Or that population will start to get controlled by other predators, whether it be snakes, hawks, coyotes, bobcats. But some of the food attractants we really can control are our bird feeders, our compost piles, our gardens, and our trash. So with bird feeders, if you find that there's a lot of spilled seed all the time, you can get squirrel-proof feeders. You can put baffles above and or below your feeders to prevent squirrels or raccoons or other things from getting there. You can remove them periodically, as I said, and that will help disperse those wildlife populations. And one thing to consider is, populations like tree squirrels. Rodents are very prone to having boom years if there's really good mass production on trees, and hickories and walnuts are being produced everywhere. The following year, those very fat squirrels are going to be very successful in terms of reproduction. They'll have plenty of energy that they can turn into milk. They'll be able to have a higher percentage of their young survive, and those young are very likely to survive as well. Unfortunately, with humans on the landscape, we have sort of done something where people love feeding wildlife, and they like to feed them by sort of scattering seeds all over the ground for squirrels in this case, or groundhogs, and it can unfortunately create these artificial boom years for these species. And at the worst case, that just causes there to be a large number of these animals around. But what that can lead to is easier transmission of natural diseases that these wildlife populations have. And that sort of takes them out of that natural cycle for when those diseases could potentially boom into that population to limit it. So if you start to see issues with like warts on squirrels in your area and people are around you feeding squirrels all the time, it could be because there are these artificially high populations of squirrels. They're coming in contact with one another very often, more often than they naturally would. And so they're spreading that squirrel virus around that's giving them these warts. And similar to the carnivores I talked about earlier, you can secure a lot of these food sources, whether they be gardens or beehives or compost piles. Electric fences are fantastic. Make sure that they are species-specific fences. So a rabbit's obviously going to fit through a deer fence, but if you got a rabbit fence, he's not going to be able to squeeze through that thing. If the animal can dig, in the case of a rabbit or a mole, make sure you bury that fencing. So you sort of have to know a little bit about the biology of the animal that could be causing the problem, or that you foresee could become an issue. And so you can sort of prevent it by thinking a little bit about the animal's life history, a little bit about its biology, and you can cut these issues off before they become an issue. You can also, purchase locking lids that go on garbage. That way, rats or mice don't have access to these free foods. And with how prolific of breeders mice and other rodents can be, that can be very key to limiting those populations. And as you have heard in this talk now, that could also be very key in making your yard look like this buffet for some of the predators out there. So whether it be snakes or coyotes or bobcats or hawks, if you limit the rodent population by securing these artificial food attractants that we put out there, you can actually make your area safer and less attractive to those larger predators we have out there. And a lot of the methods I've said have also worked very well for deer, especially electric fences, or at least species-specific fences. And for you in this group, that may be very critical for as you're establishing some of your native plants. You might want to keep deer off of things for a time, and this could be a very easy temporary solution to just putting up an electric fence when you have deer in the area. So with that, I want to end with, just remember that coexisting with wildlife, living with wildlife is the goal. Changing that perception of, this animal's a pest, I have an infestation of this, to, why do I have an infestation of this? What am I doing that is allowing this to happen? Am I not maintaining my house and sealing up these small gaps and cracks as they occur so that animals have free shelter? Am I not, securing my bird feeders, and so there's plenty of food on the ground for mammals to utilize, even though I just want to look at birds? So think about how you can change what you're doing, or provide some of these resources to neighbors if you see it happening to them, or if in passing they say, oh yeah, I have this mouse problem or this raccoon problem and I don't know why, and I'm sick and tired of it, and I'm going to take it to the next level. You can be like, well, maybe we can get to the bottom of this. So with that, I want to say, thank you for listening today. I'm always available for any of you to call me if you have any issues with wildlife and you would like to try to find a solution so that you're not being flummoxed anymore. The wildlife can keep being wild, but they're not causing you issues. And with that, I wanted to end on a video of an armadillo I got recently down in South Central Indiana. And these guys are just fun. They just sort of amble about noisily and find insects to eat. So with that, thank you, and I will happily take any questions.
Thank you, Brad. That was great. I actually didn't know until recently that we even had armadillos in Indiana. I always think of that as a more southern animal.
Yeah, they're starting to spread up here.
Okay, interesting. We had a few questions in the chat, some of which you already discussed. Raccoons nesting on the roof or defecating on the roof. Deterrence.
Yeah, deterrence can be good. So obviously it's on your roof and it might be difficult to get, motion sensor lights or something up there. But if you can find how the animals are getting up there, maybe you can prevent that from happening. So if they're climbing up the gutter, maybe you can put some sort of flashing on there so that as it's climbing up, it hits the flashing and it can't get past that. So it can't use that as a ladder to get to your roof. Or maybe if you have trees that overhang onto your roof, you could even put flashing around a tree or even a baffle around the base of a tree to prevent raccoons from using that tree specifically to climb up and then, jump over to your roof. But yeah, that's a tough one, trying to get them to stop pooping on your roof.
Right. So with the flashing, you're just kind of creating like a no climb zone and they can't get beyond that. So that could work on all kinds of structures. And
yeah, exactly. And maybe you've seen it on utility poles, but some flashing recently has been, it's just attached very flat to the surface. It doesn't stick out, but it extends further than the reach of that animal that they're trying to deter. So if a raccoon's climbing up there and shimmying up the pole, it's not going to be able to reach over it, grab onto the top, and then pull past it. It's going to try and try and try. And then it'll be like, okay, never mind. And he'll go down to the next raccoon thing.
Move on.
Yeah.
Okay. Rebecca asked if there are armadillos in Brown County. It sounds like there are from what you said.
Yeah, there are armadillos there. They occur fairly regularly. Over the past 5 years, I've received a lot of records from Vigo County all the way over to, probably Johnson County, and then down to Harrison County and over to Posey. So in that southwestern corner of the state, they occur there pretty regularly. And then, they spread outside of that, but not too often. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. We'll be on the lookout.
Yeah.
Mike says that he found the rabbits just jump over the electric fence around the garden. What is that going to be an issue with height? Are there like standard specs for rabbit deterrence in that regard?
Yeah, so most of the time rabbits won't jump over fencing. And if they did, it's probably a height thing. So if you had a 2-foot electric fence, I could see them jumping over that. But if you got a 4-foot electric fence that had, pretty tight squares, maybe 2 inches by 4 inches, I wouldn't see them being able to jump over that and definitely not fit through there. So it could just be a height issue.
Okay. And Richard is asking how you would recommend protecting a compost bin that sits directly on the dirt and is open on the top.
Right. Well, I'd say it sort of depends on what's getting in there. Maybe you can chime in the chat or unmute yourself. Yeah, it depends on what's getting in there that you're trying to keep out. Raccoons, skunks, opossums.
Richard, do you know if there are specific animals you're trying to keep out?
Chipmunks. So for that, I mean, maybe putting hardware cloth on the outside of the compost pile. So I have a pallet compost pile at my house, and I was able to use, chicken wire on sides that didn't have any issues with rodents, and then I had to use hardware cloth that had tighter squares on sides where I did have like mice getting in there, and that was able to keep them out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that tighter square, smaller weave that you really need, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, yeah, and then you might run into the issue of them, being able to climb up that at that point. So metal flashing, which is totally just flat, could be used, or even if you just put a band of that around there, because I know if you just did solid metal flashing, that'll affect your compost and its ability to cool down, because it'd probably get way too hot. So you could just do a small band of that on there.
Right, that little no climb zone again.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Rebecca asks, is there any reason not to use liquid fence to protect plants? That's new to me.
That is new to me also. What is liquid fence?
Rebecca, are you able to unmute or put something in the chat to describe what your liquid fence is?
It's a product that I bought on Amazon. It was recommended to me on the Facebook page. It smells really bad when you first put it on the plant. I think it maybe smells like animal urine. And the smell dissipates pretty quickly. They recommend you do it, I think, twice in the first like 2 weeks, and then once a month after that. I started using it on my native plants, and it seemed to work pretty well. I didn't have much, damage to the little plants. I didn't lose as many flowers. So I just wondered if it, it claims to be non-toxic and all that. So I just didn't know if there were any downsides to that.
Yeah, I mean, if it works, and maybe check the ingredients to see if there's any active ingredients that if you do a little research on, you wouldn't feel comfortable putting out there in the environment. But I don't know, it almost sounds like it's one of those essential oil sort of tinctures that you could put, on the outside of your house to prevent chipmunks from running around. It almost sounds like something like that, but maybe very effective.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And think about things like if you have to reapply after rain or something like that, and how often you need to apply.
Yeah, I saw Nancy commented in there that solar powered motion sensors work very well, and they definitely do. Those ones, use natural energy that's out there. They stay charged all the time, and you can get those things away from your house, or you could even get them on your house where you don't have a power source easily attachable. So those can be a really good solution for sort of spooking wildlife and getting them to get out of there. You could put those even under porches, just sort of extend the solar portion out from underneath your porch, put the lights underneath, and that could help keep, opossums and skunks and woodchucks from getting under there.
Okay, great. Yeah, it really sounds like deterrence and protection is key.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are, lots of kill methods, and there's lots of terrible methods that I don't understand how they still are out there, like gassing and things like that for moles. I've never understood that, but there are those options out there. I always just try to find the actual solution, because the problem isn't the animal there. The problem is the person's perception of the animal, or you have this attractant that the animal is getting a hold of, and that's why it's there. So actually getting to the root of the problem is what I'd like to get at.
That makes sense. All right, it's about 8:05 right now, so I just wanted to see, are there any last questions for Brad while we still have them? Feel free to unmute, ask a question, or enter it into the chat. These are good questions, so thanks, everybody.
They are, thank you.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Is it true that wildlife control operators euthanize the animals?
So in some circumstances, yes, because there are laws on where they can take the animals. So they have to keep them within county. And if they are going to, and they have to take them to places they have permission to release those animals. So if they don't have permission anymore, or it's rescinded, or the area is, also overrun with, groundhogs, for example, it could be more harm to introduce that groundhog into that established population of groundhogs, and then have territorial things, disputes sort of, emerge from that, have multiple groundhogs get injured because you've, upset the balance. So they do it in certain circumstances, but not all of them will. And you can ask them up front. You can say, you can hire them for their position, and before they actually do anything, say, hey, if you're going to euthanize, I'd prefer that you wouldn't, at least, use that as a last resort, something like that.
Well, Brad, you have a lot of appreciation in the chat right now. Deborah is asking, if I have to cut down a tree to prevent raccoons from climbing on my roof, I'll remove a bird habitat. Is there a better time to cut down the tree? I guess in terms of how it affects the bird and its life cycle, I assume.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If at all possible, try not to cut down the tree. Maybe just cut off the branch that's leaning over the house, so that the raccoons can't use that as the access point. But if it comes to the point where, the tree has to be cut down, I would avoid breeding seasons for birds. And that'll actually work well for bats too. Bats that could potentially be roosting in a tree will be out there from about May through early October. So, if you had to cut a tree, I would recommend doing it in the winter months when vegetation's off the leaves. You're not going to have breeding animals out there, and that'd probably be the safest for a lot of individuals.
That makes sense. Thank you, Deborah. Well, everybody, thank you again for attending tonight. Stay tuned for upcoming presentations. Brad, as always, it's been great having you here. We're probably going to hit you up again because you are just such a wealth of information on so many different topics. And it's always just great, everything to walk away with. So thank you so much for your time and for the work that you do and what you contribute. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys very much. I appreciate coming and talking to you guys.